All right, guys, I'm going to get going here. Thank you so much for attending today. If you have any issues or questions or anything like that through the GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar application there, you can go ahead and chat or ask questions. I'll do my best to try and touch them at the end, and if not, I can follow up separately. So today's webinar is going to be short and brief and to the point, and our topic here, as you can see, is benefits of revenue management and why you need it. My name is Josh Wise, VP of Customer Success. Felt a little bit bad about this picture because I'm cropping out my wife, daughter, and her friend, but nonetheless, maybe it's a little bit too big there. But anyways, a little bit about me. My role here at Redstream is to put smiles on faces, whether it's coworkers or clients, helping solve problems, helping implement procedures, making sure our solutions are a good fit for our customers, and really trying to add some value to small independent lodging properties. I've been here for almost 9 years in October, so it's been a long time in terms of longevity. Absolutely love what I do. Specifically love helping out smaller businesses. Redstream itself is a smaller business as well. Some personal stuff about me. I've been with my wife for 23 years. Actually, it'll be 23 years here on the 28th of this month. We actually started dating in 7th grade. So definitely knew early on she was the one, and it's been that way ever since. And we have a 7-year-old daughter, and she is a ham only child. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but she's definitely a ham. Love that one. A little bit about Redstream, guys, for those of you that are not familiar. We're headquartered out of Denver, Colorado. We've got 19 employees on staff here. We've got some remote employees, some sales reps remotely, which we refer to as customer success consultants. And then we have some remote development programmers in Minnesota and California that are responsible for our reservation software. As far as combined experience here at Redstream amongst the staff in the hospitality industry, we've got over 75 years. So, you know, we love this marketplace, love the segment, love the clients, and the people that we seek out to work at Redstream are very passionate employees with industry experience in some way, shape, or form. In terms of properties, Redstream currently supports over 600 properties. I would say 95% of those are less than 50 rooms. 100% of those are independent properties. So that is our focus. That's where we fit well. That's where our solutions and our pricing fits in well. And we absolutely love that. So. Okay, so as far as the 3 main things we're going to go through today, and I'll keep it short and sweet, respecting everyone's time. I know y'all are busy heading into a weekend with it being Thursday. Typically Friday, Saturdays are pretty busy for everybody, especially this time of year, so being mindful of that. So we're going to talk about what is revenue management in general, the history of revenue management, just so you guys can kind of understand, get a little background on it. And then lastly, but most importantly, some tips on how you can leverage revenue management at your property. Okay, so what is revenue management, right? It's the concept of selling the right room at the right price at the right time, okay? Now, the objective here is to maximize profits by applying knowledge about markets and trends. And so what specifically does that mean? It means that you have historical data, okay? You already have this historical data to start taking advantage of revenue management. And that historical data is about your location, your city, your town, your area, the events that go on that are driving potential guests or visitors to your area. You know the holidays and when they come and which ones have been historically busy for you. Is 4th of July busy for you, but President's Day is not, right? And then more specifically, as it relates to your property, you know the seasons winter, spring, summer, fall, busy seasons, peak seasons, shoulder season, off seasons that are busier and that are not. You know the months, the weekends, the weekdays, which are busy and which are going to be slow. So you already have that historical knowledge to start referencing and applying that as it relates to revenue management, right? For those of you that have been at your property for multiple years, you know, that means that you have multiple years of this data at your fingertips. You just need to start referencing that. So we'll go through that in some of the tips. So the purpose of today here, guys, is to help make sure you're utilizing all of this information to help maximize your profits by selling your perishable rooms at the right price at the right time. So the key thing there is perishable rooms, right? So as an example, today's here. If you don't have all the rooms full, then those rooms are perishable. So tomorrow we can't sell the rooms for today, right? So we need to start taking control of our own fortune here, guys. So because these rooms are perishable, we don't get to go back in time and try and sell them or fill them up or get heads in beds, right? So that opportunity is then lost. And as a result, we're losing revenue when we don't get people in those rooms. So we need to start using that historical data, and we have got to be proactive in order to put more heads in beds. So something to think about here. If your sole focus is on occupancy, meaning that you're trying to achieve 100% occupancy, you're always going to leave money on the table, okay? So something to think about is when you're running 90+% occupied, that means that your rates aren't high enough because you're filling those things up. There is demand and limited supply, and so you're not leveraging or taking advantage of that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So that's what is revenue management. Hopefully that made sense. Now, a little bit about the history here of revenue management, and kind of follow the arrows along here with me. So it started with the airlines back in the early 70s, okay? And the airlines realized that they had a fixed number of seats on their planes, right? A plane only holds X amount of people. They've got X amount of seats, and that doesn't change. They then realized that they also have perishable inventory. If we know when the flight is taking off, the scheduled flight time, we know how many seats are on there. If we don't get booties in those seats, then they're losing money, right? So that's what really started in the airline industry, what they refer to as yield management, right? So once they realized those things, then they started messing around with what they called fenced pricing, okay, in about the mid-70s. And they would basically, I tried to make a fence there to kind of make the point, but they would say, okay, as of today, it's $100, and as of today, it's $90 if you book a seat on that flight. And then as of today, it's $100. So it kept going up and down, and that's all they did to kind of adjust it in order to try and fill those seats. Well, then they realized that it was working, and they needed to do some more quantitative analysis, right? So then they started really tracking and getting granular as it related to seasonality, as it related to how these airline flights tickets were selling based on day of week, time of day, and the actual destination. And that is then what created yield management, is the analysis of all of that historical data and the ebbing and flowing of the prices. And we all have experienced it ourselves. So as an example, my family and I and a close friends and their family were taking all the kids to Disney World in October. Well, we booked our lodging, not through an OTA, by the way. I like to always point that out. We booked our lodging direct with the property down in Florida, and we booked that back in March. Well, we've been looking at flights since March, and I'll log in maybe, several times a month, and I'll check flights. And these flight prices are going up and down depending upon how quickly that plane is filling up, right? So they're yielding the price based on the supply and the demand around it. So flights in March were around $200, okay? And then when I looked again in April, they were up around $400, $500, $600, which is insane. So I'm kicking myself because I didn't book back in March. And then I looked again in May, and prices were down around $350. Well, I finally booked the flights this week, and I got them for around $250. So those prices and the fluctuation of the pricing was dictating based on pacing of how that historical pace was taking place for that particular flight at that particular time of year from that particular location going from Denver to Florida, Orlando specifically. And they're adjusting the prices based on supply and demand, right? And that's what then that's what then turned into revenue management in the lodging industry, right? And there's a lot of similarities here between the two. So the industry that created yield management and the fluctuation of prices based on supply and demand has a lot of similarities to hotels, because hotels, lodging properties, bed and breakfast inns, what have you, have a fixed number of rooms that are also perishable, and they also have guests that are willing to pay a different price for the same exact room, right? Just like the example I just described with the airline industry. And then the lodging industry started to use that data, similar to the analysis that the airlines were doing, in order to help them predict the future demand of their rooms so that they could price them appropriately, and that is revenue management, right? Okay, so we've talked about what it is. We've talked about the history of it here. So hopefully you all understand the concept. So let's get into some practical tips and talk about how you can apply this, okay? Okay, tip number one is related to tracking, right? So the best decisions are those that mix that of your intuition and science. And in this particular case, what science is it's the data, it's the historical data. Now, before y'all jump into your PMS, your reservation software, and just start randomly changing pricing, we've got to go look at that historical data, which all of you should have, assuming you're using the reservation software, right? And assuming that you've been using it for X amount of time, or if you've switched, that data has followed you along the way. Okay, so what exactly is it that we should be tracking and reviewing? Well, the first thing is rooms sold. How many rooms were sold during a specific time frame that we need to set our prices for? So we need to go back in history and look at that data. Reference 2016, 2015, 2014. Now, when you're just starting out with revenue management, I would probably just leverage last year, because as you start to go back into multiple years, you can get what they refer to as paralysis by analysis. And I'm sure it's happened to all of us at some point or another. But for example purposes, maybe just reference the last year, okay? And then the next thing that we should be looking at here is occupancy percentage for that same specific time frame. So let's start looking at when we're most occupied, and why is it that we're so full? Why is it that we're almost 100% or are at 100% occupied? Is it because it's related to the specific season? Is there an event going on in town that's drawing guests in? Is it the specific location that draws people? So as an example, in Minnesota, the family resorts, every summer, families go up there and they stay for a month, right? In Denver, we have various different events that go on during the summer that people come out for, whether it's shows or sporting events or what have you, right? So as you're going back looking at rooms sold for a specific time frame, let's call it our busy season, and then we're looking at the occupancy during that busy season, let's try and identify why we're busy during that time. What is it, right? So once we understand the market conditions and the reason behind when we're busy and as well as when we're not, that helps us start leveraging revenue management, right? Okay, then we're going to look at our average rate, our average daily rate, ADR, okay? And we need to look at what we're charging. And so you can see if you've adjusted rates during the same peak times from the previous years, When you go back and say, look at 2016, did you have the same rate in 2016 that you do in 2017 during that same time frame? Okay, and then look at how you're trending this year, right? So if last year, and call it August, we're running at 95% occupancy and our rooms were, as an example, $100, this year, are we pacing to also be 95+% occupied, and our price is still the same, $100? If so, we're leaving money on the table, guys. So we need to take a look at this data in order to make some intelligent business decisions, right? So pace is very important. We're looking at how we are compared this year as of today based on how we were last year as of the same day for the same time frame. So I want to go back historically and gather that information and see, has anything happened outside of our control that could potentially impact our peak times that we're used to. So again, if August is a peak time and we're not pacing as well as we were last year, it could be for various different factors, right? Some of those factors could include market conditions, the competitive supply, have new properties in your area popped up and it's diluting or increasing the number of available inventory or rooms, which is diluting your occupancy and then impacting your revenue, right? Do we have any capacity constraints that could be impacting our pacing? Are we doing renovations? Do we have rooms that are down and under maintenance? That plays a factor as well, right? As well as special events. Last year, maybe in your area, they did a Harley-Davidson convention, but this year it got canceled for this reason or that reason, right? That can impact pacing. And same with weather patterns, right? Those of you that are in certain locations, and weather is a big draw of why people come or why they get away from their hometown, what have you, during specific times of years, that can have an impact, right? So taking all this data related to tracking and room sold and occupancy and average rate and pacing of the same time from the previous year, now let's put this to practical use, okay? Not right now, but maybe jot this down or remember this when you get off this webinar. Find some time to go look at these metrics, and as a small sample, why don't you look at these metrics for the remainder of July and August and September. So you're looking at these metrics in your reservation software, right? And you're going back in 2016, looking at the end of July and August and September, and now you're going to do it for 2017, and you're going to see how you're pacing or performing. How are your rooms being sold last year versus this year? What is your occupancy percentage in those months? What is the average rate that you're charging, okay? And that's going to be the first thing that we're going to do as part of this exercise to start actually utilizing revenue management, okay? So jot that down or remember that one, okay? The second of the 3 tips that we're going to cover today is related to pricing, okay? So as it relates to pricing here, the goal is to maximize the price you can obtain for your room at the right time. So if you remember the history of revenue management, yield management, similar to the airlines who have perishable seats on a plane with a specific departure date and time, your rooms are very similar, right? Although your rooms don't fly, hopefully. So if you're not selling your rooms, losing out on revenue that you could have had, right? So we have to be proactive. We can't just sit back and assume that people are going to come. We can't rely solely on OTAs, right? You just add another OTA to get more heads in beds. That's not the only way to work. And in every situation, getting a direct booking is much more profitable than getting an OTA booking, right? So let me make this point, okay? If you take nothing else away from today, I really want you to focus on what I'm about to say. In my almost 9 years here, I've worked with thousands of small independent properties with less than 50 rooms, okay? And I constantly hear the same thing when I talk about changing pricing, revenue management, yield management, and that is that you owners out there, the ones setting the pricing for your property, your rooms, your service, your goods, You guys don't want to alienate your repeat guests. You rely on those repeat guests. And you feel that by raising pricing, you're very cost conscious. You think your guests are cost conscious. You think that they're gonna, excuse my language, bitch and complain about it, and they're gonna stop coming and stop being loyal and stop being repeat guests. But guys, your repeat guests, better than any brand new guests you're ever gonna get, are the ones that know your value. They know the experience that they're gonna get. They love the hospitality and the attention to detail and the service that you provide, okay? They've been to your property. They've experienced that unique offering and the exceptional customer service, and the reason why they're repeat guests and keep coming back is because of those very reasons. So they are, in fact, the exact audience that's willing to pay a higher price because of that value. So please, please, please do not use that as a crutch or an excuse of reasons why you don't feel comfortable or you don't or will not raise your rates, okay? Hotels do it, airlines do it, everyone's doing it, right? I'll give you an example unrelated to lodging. My wife and I have a local Mexican restaurant that we frequent. We absolutely love it, think it's delicious. I don't know if I'm ashamed or happy to say I go there at least once a week. Well, I went in there 2 weeks ago, and the very first thing that the waitress that we're friends with, because we go so often, said to me is like, "Oh, man, we just raised our price on our hot green chili by 50 cents. I'm so sorry about that." And I said, "What are you apologizing for?" She's like, "Well, other customers have given us grief because we raised the price 50 cents. And I said, "Don't worry about that. The reason why they keep coming here and they're loyal is because they absolutely love the food that you offer. And as a business, you need to be competitive and stay in business for us to keep coming back and love it. So if you need to raise the price by 50 cents, that's not a big deal. Quite honestly, if you raised it a couple bucks, I'm still coming in here because that's how much I love it," right? So that change in pricing, by increasing that pricing, even if they lose a couple clients, that increase in revenue goes directly to the bottom line and the profitability of the business. So if they lose some clients, but they're raising prices and getting more money from the masses, they're going to be increasing their revenue and their gross profit overall, right? Okay. So how do we actually go about accomplishing adjusting prices? Okay, well, first, we need to make sure that your rooms are appropriately priced for the units that differ from each other, right? So rooms with larger beds, king versus queen, queen versus twins, what have you, those should be garnering higher rates, right? Rooms with better views, different amenities, specific locations can always yield a better price. Most of you do a really good job of differentiating between these, and if not, make sure you're doing that appropriately. Make sure they're priced reasonably, and you're selling the value and the difference between those rooms on your website, right? People need to know that this room is better than that room, and that's why it's a higher price, and here's why. Because of the view, because of the bedside, because of the specific amenities, the jacuzzi tub, the bigger TV, the ocean view, the mountain view, the stream view, whatever it is, right? So that's the first thing, differentiating between those rooms, okay? For those of you where this concept is new, I like to say it's a good idea to have an occupancy ceiling and an occupancy floor, okay? So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, let's say your ceiling is at 90%. That's your occupancy percent ceiling. And as you begin implementing this new tactic of revenue management and adjusting your rates, a good example is when you're more occupied than 90%, you have high demand and limited supplier inventory of rooms. So you can leverage that by raising rates. And guess what? If you play around and raise your rates a little too much and nobody books the remaining inventory, that's okay, because you're not going to be hurting because you're already over 90% occupied, right? So for those of you that may be a little hesitant, maybe think of 90% occupied as your ceiling, right? Now, this also goes the other way with revenue management. It's not just a one-way street. This also applies to lowering your rates, right? So when are you not as busy and you need a floor to say, okay, dang, I got to get heads and beds here to cover operating costs, so I need to start lowering my prices. So maybe a good floor is 30% for you. And once you get below 30% occupied, then you start decreasing the cost of your rooms, similar to what the airlines would do in my example of my trip to Florida, and start getting heads and beds at a discounted rate. And as it starts filling up, then you can adjust your price back to normal or even increase it if you've got an influx of demand and limited supply, right? So I think lastly here, let's take a look at the booking date of the reservation this year versus say last year. And are we seeing on average people are booking 90 days out? So when you go back and do your exercise and you're looking at the end of, or let's just say August and September, when you look at that data from last year, find out when those people actually booked those reservations. Was it 90 days out, 60 days out, 14 days out, 7 days out? And based on that data, that's when you know you can adjust your pricing based on when people are booking for that specific time, right? So that data is very relevant and important in order to make those adjustments. And then from there, if your reservation software doesn't have some type of automated yield management, revenue management feature that adjusts your pricing based on variables that you set, you need to pay attention to it. This is not a set it and forget it thing, okay? Rates should never be a set it and forget it thing. I've talked to hundreds of properties that adjust their rates and call it October, November for the next year, and maybe they do a 3% bump or a 5% bump, and then that's it. They don't touch them for the entire year until the next October, November when they're doing the next year after that, right? It is not a set it and forget it thing. We are leaving money on the table if we are not constantly looking at room sold, occupancy, ADR, pacing, historical data points, right? We need to start leveraging the data that we have to help us predict the future of what we're used to getting. And as you get more familiar with this and you go further back in time and start looking at 2015 and 2014 and 2013, and you get a sense for when you're busy and when you're not busy and when people are actually making the bookings, then you'll be able to make solid decisions around adjusting that pricing, right? So continuing on our first exercise, guys, once you've kind of set that ceiling and floor, and you're more than welcome to use my 90%, 30% if you like, or adjust it how you need to for your business, then go back and let's look at the end of July and August to September, and let's identify any opportunities where we can raise or lower rates appropriately to make sure that we're not losing out on selling our perishable rooms, right? Because people not in rooms is lost revenue. So let's not let that happen to us. Okay. Lastly, this third tip here is related to inventory management, right? So at this point, we've talked about looking at historical trends and the pacing for the future. At this point, let's say that we've adjusted the pricing to correlate with what it is that we've seen and what it is that we're forecasting for end of July, August, and September and beyond. Now we need to pay attention to managing the inventory properly in order to maximize both reservations and revenue. So the first thing that you've all experienced at some time or another is what I like to call playing Tetris with the reservations on your occupancy map, right? So here's an example of an occupancy map. So you've got to move reservations around so that you can minimize what we refer to in the industry as donut holes, right? So if I've got one here, I've got one here, I can pop that baby to a different direction, move it down potentially down here. I've got some room so that I can open up more than a one-night stay, which is typical in small independent lodging. Not often are people staying one night unless you're focusing on business travelers, right? So we need to play Tetris with that occupancy map in order to fill in the gaps and increase more multiple night stays in order for us to maximize and take advantage of that revenue management that we've done. In today's market, what we're seeing is that most properties rely pretty heavily on OTAs, online travel agents like Expedia and Booking.com, in order to help get reservations, right? The majority of the properties I speak to are on this set it and forget it type system with OTAs, meaning that they turn them on and they say, hey, I've got availability, and it syncs with your reservation software, hopefully, so that it's automated. And then the reservations come in and everything's good. You don't really think twice about it, right? Well, guys, that's a poor way of managing your inventory. If we see historically that you're going to be busy in a particular season, month, week, weekend, event, whatever, you need to go into those channels and you need to shut them off. Why? Why, Josh? Why am I shutting those off? What are you talking about? Because you're paying anywhere between 15 and 30% in commission to those third-party OTAs when you could have gotten those reservations directly or had room for reservations to come in through your direct channel. And that 15 and 30% that they're charging you in commission goes straight to your bottom line. It goes into your pocket, not their pocket, right? Now, I'm not saying don't use OTAs. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you're not paying attention to them and you're not being intelligent about when you use them, then you're missing out on opportunities to drive more direct business, increase your revenue, your profits, the money that goes into your pocket and your bank account, right? So don't use those guys or close those channels down when you expect to be full. Well, Josh, I don't know when I expect to be full. Well, bull malarkey. You've got the historical data. Start leveraging it. Go look at the time frames from 2016, 15, 14, 13, and so on, right? There are trends going on. Do trends always stay exactly the same? No, of course not. Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're worse, but you have a sense of historical data. And for those of you that have been doing this a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, you know this. You just need to trust it. Trust the data, trust your instincts, and start implementing this so that you can make more money, right? Okay, lastly here, as it relates to inventory management, you need to adjust minimum night stays accordingly. So in peak times, when you expect to be full, based on that historical data, busy season, those minimum night stay requirements are longer. Maybe they're 3 nights, 4 nights, 5 nights in some cases, 7 nights in certain areas. In the off-peak times, those requirements loosen down to 2 nights or 1 night, or they're not even in place at all, right? So in addition here, if you're trying to fill those donut holes during the peak seasons, you need to make sure that you are reducing your minimum night stay requirements. And hopefully you have a booking engine where this is automated and does this automatically so you don't have to do it manually. But if not, shame on you. If you've got a donut hole here and you can only take a 1-night booking, but because you're in peak season, you're only accepting reservations with a 2-night minimum, guess what? Someone was going to book this and we just lost them because we don't have that unit available for them, right? So pay attention to your minimum night stays in both your peak times and off-peak times and make sure that they're being adjusted accordingly so that way you can maximize reservations and revenue, right? So do me a favor, another exercise, jot this down and remember this. As soon as we get off this thing, go look at your occupancy map in your reservation software. If it looks anything like this picture does, surely there are adjustments that can be made to move reservations or change minimum night stays or log on to your OTAs or through your software if it allows it go close out your inventory and availability for those channels when we're expecting to be full anyways. Let's not give our money away 15 to 30% to these sharks, as I've heard them be referred to, right? So let's make sure that we're maximizing those channels in order to book direct. So in recapping today's webinar, we've talked about what revenue management is. It's selling the right room at the right price at the right time. We've talked about the history of it and given examples. The airline industry invented it. They perfected it. We've all experienced it when looking up flights. We've all been on an airplane, I'm assuming. And we've all experienced that price going up or down, and we're waiting for the right moment. And sometimes we book at a higher rate because we waited too long. But they perfected it almost to the point where it pisses us off because they're overselling flights. How many times have you been waiting to board a flight and they get on the intercom and they say, we've overbooked and we're offering $200 if you want to take the next flight, right? So they do it to the point where it pisses us off. So we need to start leveraging what it is that they're doing as it relates to our small business. Now, another point I'll make here is no property is too small to take advantage of revenue management. I don't care if you've got 3 rooms or 5 rooms or 7 rooms. You do not have to be a chain hotel with 200 rooms to take advantage of revenue management, right? Even if you're a property that has individual rooms, a John Wayne room, a Marilyn Monroe room, a John Elway room, sorry, I'm from Denver. Even if you're a property that doesn't have room types, you can still take advantage of revenue management because you can look at that historical data and see peak times versus off-peak times, the historical pacing, and adjust rates accordingly, right? And then we need to manage our inventory as we've just addressed, whether it's moving things around, whether it's closing out channels so that money goes in our pocket or adjusting minimum night stays, okay? So I've given you guys some exercises. And now you can go start looking at these and implement it. The last thing I'll say here, guys, is whatever adjustments you make, jot them down. Get a notebook out, put them in your phone, however you take notes. Jot down the adjustments you've made and why, so that way you can learn from it. If it works out, great, do the same thing next year. If it doesn't work out, reference that and make a different adjustment, right? At this point, you control your own destiny and you can be as reactive or proactive as you want. If we all sit around and do nothing and expect people to show up, we're either going to have good years or bad years, and we're going to have no control over it, right? But we're busting our ass, killing ourselves to make people happy and provide a wonderful experience. But if we're not proactive about getting them in the door and leveraging the pricing and supply and demand, then we're missing opportunities. Let's not regret this and look back and say, oh, we should have done this, that, or the other when we move on after lodging to the next phase of our lives, okay? Okay, lastly here, and in wrapping up, if you enjoyed today's session and you like to hear different viewpoints and be educated as you're running around with a chicken with your head cut off, that's what ResStream's all about, educational webinars. You do not have to pay for these. You do not have to be a customer of ours to take advantage of this. We want to give back to the industry, okay? So that's what we're all about. So if you'd like to sign up for other future webinars, you can go here on our website, resstream.com, go to the webinar section, and more specifically, our next webinar is August 24th, next month. We try and do at least one a month. And the specific topic is how you can leverage email marketing during the busy season, right? So if your busy season isn't going as well as you had hoped because you're being reactive and not proactive, today's example and webinar has given you ideas on how to be proactive. Next month's webinar will give you more ideas on a specific email marketing channel on how to do so. So please utilize that. Please take advantage of these free resources, guys, and the goal being to help you guys out. If you have, I don't see any questions here. If you guys need anything or have any questions, feel free to reach out to ResStream. Call me specifically, Josh Wise again, Love to help out any way that we can. So thank you so much for your attendance today. I greatly appreciate it. Hopefully you've viewed this as valuable. I'm sorry I went more than 30 minutes, 41 minutes to be exact, but less than my normal 60 minutes. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.